Before taking on the role of Gimli, John Rhys-Davies said The Lord of the Rings would be a failure. He said it was unfilmable. The director, Peter Jackson, lacked experience with big-budget productions, and John was more than happy to take a month-long paid vacation in New Zealand before the entire production fizzled to a pop. Then, just a couple of weeks into filming, John Rhys-Davies completely flipped. He went from being the film's worst critic to becoming its #1 advocate, stating to the press to mark his words and that The Fellowship of the Ring would outgross its competitor that year, Star Wars. So what made him change? Well, in today's video, join me as I uncover the lore behind one of cinema's most prolific actors and reveal how he got the role of Gimli, even after auditioning for someone else, how his time on set turned him into Peter Jackson's biggest fan, and how he proudly ate his own words and ended up predicting the trilogy's massive success before it ever got released. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to Fact or Fantasy, a place where we dive deep into the books and films to discuss all things Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. This is episode 3 in my series where I explore your favorite actors and how they became their iconic fictional characters. Today we are uncovering the unbelievable story of John Rhys-Davies. We'll talk about his extreme initial skepticism and how he was forced to take the role by his agent, how he played a dwarf when he actually physically dwarfed his co-stars on set, and we'll even discuss how he burned his prosthetic Gimli mask at the end of filming because of how much he hated it. Long story, but don't worry, we'll cover it all in this video. So sit back, relax, grab a pint or some salted pork, and enjoy this deep dive into John Rhys-Davies' journey to becoming Gimli. To understand why John was so incredibly resistant to joining the Fellowship, we first have to look at exactly who he was before 1999. Much like Sir Ian McKellen, John was not some up-and-coming actor searching for a breakout role. He was a seasoned, highly respected veteran. He had already amassed over 80 screen credits across film, television, stage, and voice acting, cementing himself as a heavyweight in the industry. Graduating from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in 1969, John spent his formative years performing with the elite Royal Shakespeare Company, tackling heavy hitters like Othello and Macbeth. He had that booming, theatrical baritone voice and a level of gravitas that made him a titan of the stage. But he was also a massive blockbuster veteran. You probably knew him as the charismatic Sala in Indiana Jones, the KGB general in The Living Daylights, and Professor Arturo in Sliders. John knew the mechanics of a massive Hollywood production. He held exacting standards. So when he heard that a relatively unknown indie director named Peter Jackson was attempting to adapt Tolkien's legendary fantasy epic, John was entirely dismissive. He didn't just doubt it, he thought the project was an unfilmable folly. He found Tolkien's dense, non-linear narrative practically unreadable, and he fully assumed that the independent production would quickly run out of money and fizzle out. And his initial interaction with the casting department? It's pretty hilarious. John didn't originally audition for Gimli, he auditioned for the role of Denethor, the Steward of Gondor. But why? Well, he did this purely for a mercenary, recreational trip. He figured Denethor would only require a few weeks of filming, allowing him to score a fully paid 1-month holiday in New Zealand, tour a beautiful country he'd never seen, and then safely return home before the production ultimately collapsed. His philosophy was pretty much get in, get out, and get paid before they went bankrupt. But Peter Jackson and the casting team saw something different. They heard that booming voice and Shakespearean energy and realized that they had found their dwarf. They completely bypassed his Denethor audition and formally offered him the role of Gimli. This drastically changed the deal. Gimli wasn't a 1-month holiday. Gimli required a multi-year commitment, uprooting his life for a grueling extended shoot on the other side of the planet. So John flatly refused. Beyond his skepticism of the fantasy genre as a whole, he had one massive hang-up. He had spent his entire career building a name for himself, getting to that point where audiences could recognize his face on screen. So now, why would he go to a movie that was wanting to bury his face behind a heavy, restrictive mask for 3 years? And he knew that he'd be spending more time sitting in the makeup department than actually on set acting. He had no intention of spending 3 years of his life under a pile of silicone, just for the first movie to come out, flop, and the next 2 go direct to DVD. So after they offered the role of Gimli, John would have walked away completely had it not been for his new agent, Jeff Goldberg. Goldberg recognized the unprecedented scale and financial backing of the New Line Cinema production. When John continually declined the offer, his agent delivered a brutal, highly irregular professional ultimatum: take the part of Gimli, or the agency would immediately drop him. Faced with the sudden loss of his representation, John was quite literally forced into signing the contract. So he packed his bags for Wellington, harboring a deep-seated resentment and a solid expectation of a catastrophic cinematic failure. John arrived in New Zealand with a chip on his shoulder and a highly critical, adversarial disposition, and one of his hang-ups was Peter Jackson. At the time, Jackson was only known for low-budget, independent horror comedies like Bad Taste and Brain Dead, as well as the specialized indie drama of Heavenly Creatures. These movies were a far cry from a $300 million fantasy epic, and John viewed Jackson as entirely ill-equipped to handle a cast and crew of thousands and with over a dozen leading characters. Driven by his prejudice against the production and his lingering resentment over being forced into the role, John spent his first couple of weeks actively patrolling the various pre-production departments. He walked through the sound stages, the wardrobe departments, and the prop houses, deliberately searching for flaws, structural shortcuts, and evidence of amateurism. After all, Jackson was building an entirely new production company in the heart of New Zealand. These weren't seasoned veterans. For much of the crew, Lord of the Rings was their first job in the industry. Coming from the highly polished worlds of James Bond and Steven Spielberg, he expected to find cheap, mass-produced set dressings, flimsy foam props, and corner-cutting indicative of an over-leveraged production destined for failure. But this is where John Rhys-Davies was met with something he didn't expect. Instead of finding grounds for criticism, the Skeptic's patrol resulted in a profound artistic revelation. Everywhere John looked, he encountered an astonishing level of craftsmanship, passion, and historical realism that rivaled or exceeded anything he had ever seen in Hollywood. The art direction did not rely on prefabricated furniture or generic fantasy tropes. Everything was meticulously crafted. The crew had literally spent a year growing real hedges and replanting flowers to ensure the Shire sets possessed organic authenticity, and fabrics were legitimately homespun. The armorers were not pouring rubber molds for background extras. They were linking real steel chainmail by hand, forging operational broadswords, and designing distinct, culturally accurate heraldry for every race in Tolkien's legendarium. Furthermore, he witnessed the creation of bigatures, massive, incredibly detailed scale models of fortresses like Helm's Deep and Minas Tirith that allowed for sweeping, highly realistic camera movements. Simultaneously, he observed his castmates' extreme dedication to sword training and dialect work and recognized that Jackson possessed a masterful, general-like command over the massive production. Jackson utilized advanced computer animatics and meticulous miniature setups to pre-visualize sprawling battle sequences, demonstrating a level of preparation that stunned the veteran actor. The sheer, undeniable quality of the work entirely dismantled John's prejudice. He transitioned from an active cynic to a deeply devoted believer, falling in love with the story, the crew, and the overarching vision of the films. And now, with John fully committed intellectually and emotionally, the production could execute one of the most brilliant logistical workarounds in modern cinematic history: the mathematics of forced perspective. Except it was a little different with Gimli. Jackson was faced with the daunting, incredibly expensive task of constantly framing characters of 3 distinct heights within the same shots. By casting John Rhys-Davies, who stood at around 6'1", alongside the Hobbit actors, who all stood around 5'6", the production discovered a mathematical golden ratio. The natural height difference between the 6'1" Rhys-Davies and the 5'6" Hobbit actors was perfectly proportionate to the height differential between dwarves and the hobbits in Tolkien's lore. This alignment meant that whenever Gimli and the hobbits shared a scene or a frame, they could be filmed together simultaneously on the same visual plane without any forced perspective, green screens, or scale doubles. By grouping the dwarven and hobbit characters together, the visual effects pipeline was streamlined from 3 camera passes down to 2. This logistical masterstroke saved New Line Cinema millions of dollars in visual effects compositing and countless hours of grueling post-production labor. proving the supreme utility of casting the tallest man to play the shortest warrior. It was a brilliant solution, but more importantly, it marked a complete transformation for John. The man who had arrived ready to tear the entire production apart had completely flipped, becoming fully invested in Peter Jackson's vision. And it was incredibly fortunate that he had been won over so early on, because he was going to need every single ounce of that newfound passion to endure the severe physical and psychological nightmare that the role was about to demand of him. To transform the refined, classical actor into the rugged, battle-hardened warrior of Erebor, the makeup department relied on extensive, heavy prosthetics. John was subjected to a nearly full-face silicone mask, augmented by a scratchy beard and wig, which severely restricted his peripheral vision, hearing, and facial mobility. The application required 3-hour turnaround shifts, often starting at around 3 or 5 a.m. For years, a rumor circulated that John suffered from a severe latex allergy, but in recent years, he confirmed that you don't have allergic reactions to hypoallergenic adhesive. After all, it's medical grade. Instead, the problem was much worse. The adhesive in question was engineered for extreme durability, meant to hold tissue together, and was never designed for the daily wear and tear of being applied and removed over and over again during a multi-year film shoot. The bond formed between the adhesive and John's skin was so intense that the process of removing the mask at the end of the day ripped the outer layer of his skin away. The consequence of this was severe. His eyes would swell completely shut, and his skin was left raw and highly inflamed. The trauma was so bad that John physically couldn't film consecutive days. He would arrive on set only for the makeup artist to examine his swelling face and declare that there was no healthy skin left to attach the adhesive to. So, because John was physically incapacitated for so much of the filming schedule, and because so many of Gimli's scenes were filmed next to Aragorn and Legolas, Peter Jackson had to come up with a solution. A solution to solve two problems at once. What do you do when your Gimli is recovering from getting his face ripped off and also is 6'1"? Obviously, you get a second Gimli. Enter Brett Beattie. Brett was a 4-foot 10-inch New Zealander with no prior acting experience, originally hired as a stunt rider. However, as John's skin condition worsened and the schedule demanded Gimli's presence in wide shots, the production realized Brett's height made him the perfect scale double. Within 2 weeks, he was swiftly promoted to the primary physical performer for almost all wide, medium, and action shots. While John provided the booming, theatrical baritone voice of Gimli and the voice of Treebeard, Brett became the physical engine of the dwarf. He donned the same suffocating silicone mask and heavy armor as John did, logging an astonishing 2,300 hours on camera as Gimli. In total, he filmed about 189 days worth of shots. The toll on Brett was catastrophic, and it's one that not enough Lord of the Rings fans know about or talk about. The heavy mask caused severe claustrophobia and oxygen deprivation, leading to chronic insomnia. He was frequently awoken from exhausted naps on the studio floor in a state of semi-consciousness, just to run through the treacherous sets of the Mines of Moria. During one intense action sequence, a prop axe struck Brett directly in the forehead. Unable to reach the wound through the tightly glued silicone prosthetic, the mask slowly filled with his own blood until it burst open. Also, during the 4 months of night shoots in the pouring artificial rain of the Battle of Helm's Deep, he pushed himself until he blew out both of his knees, requiring 3 separate reconstructive surgeries in the years that followed. Brett Beattie was on screen as Gimli so much that originally in the film they gave him a credit as the character. After Gimli's name, it would say John Rhys-Davies and Brett Beattie. For example, there's a 90-second combat montage in the movie that John is only visible for 4 seconds of, and the rest is Brett. Unfortunately, the studio later stripped him of his scale double credit to preserve the illusion of the character. But ultimately, it just goes to show that Gimli wasn't just a performance. He was an amalgamation, a character forged in the crucible of dual suffering. John Rhys-Davies brought the classical gravitas and the resonant voice, enduring the torture of the makeup chair, while Brett Beattie brought the sweat, the blood, and the kinetic fury of the dwarven warrior. And together, they forged one of the most memorable characters in cinematic history. As production wrapped and the cinematic release of The Fellowship of the Ring approached, the transformation of John Rhys-Davies was absolute. The man who had to be threatened by his agent just to get on a plane to New Zealand had become the production's most fervent intellectual champion and public defender. In 2001, prior to the release of the first film, the cast and crew embarked on a global press tour. The cultural landscape at the time was entirely dominated by George Lucas's Star Wars prequel trilogy, which was seen as the untouchable apex of blockbuster cinema. During a press conference, speaking to a room of highly skeptical journalists who viewed fantasy as a niche genre, John took the microphone and made a set of predictions that bordered on the impossible. He stated that Lord of the Rings would not merely be successful, but it would shatter box office records, ultimately outgrossing the Star Wars movie that came out that same year. Furthermore, he claimed that in the next 20 years, the trilogy would be recognized alongside the greatest cinematic masterpieces of all time. This was a level of hubris that terrified the production team. Peter Jackson literally buried his head in his hands, terrified of the massive media backlash if the film underperformed against such lofty comparisons. But as we know, history vindicated the Welshman entirely. The trilogy became a multi-billion-dollar cultural monolith, sweeping the Academy Awards and permanently altering the trajectory of blockbuster filmmaking. The psychological release from the trauma of production occurred during the final round of pickup shoots in 2003. As a wrap gift, Peter Jackson presented John with a screen-used Gimli axe. But the most profound gift Jackson bestowed upon the actor was permission to exact a measure of cathartic revenge on his silicone tormentor. On the penultimate day of his pickups, the irritation from the makeup was so agonizing that John could barely resist physically ripping the prosthetics from his skin. But John powered through, and upon wrapping his final scene the following day, the production crew handed him the final Gimli face mask. With pure joy, John sprinted to an open fire grate and hurled the prosthetic into the flames, happily watching the silicone that had caused him 3 years of agony melt and burn to ash. He immediately declared that he would never, under any circumstances, play a dwarf ever again. This aversion to further trauma also dictated his response to the legendary cast tattoos. Following the completion of principal photography, the actors portraying the 9 members of the Fellowship decided to get matching tattoos of the Elvish word for 9. John was the sole member of the core cast to refuse. He covered up his refusal with classic British bravado, joking that, quote, "Whenever there's anything dangerous or that involves blood, I send my stunt double to do it." And in this case, he actually did. Beneath that humor lay a profound respect for the reality of the production. The core cast were acutely aware of the agonizing hours, the blown-out knees, and the literal blood that Brett Beatty had sacrificed for the character. So, in a beautiful gesture of inclusion, the cast reached out to Beatty directly and invited him to receive the 9th tattoo. Brett initially hesitated, feeling the tattoo belonged to John, but after repeated requests from Elijah Wood, Orlando Bloom, and Viggo Mortensen, he accepted. He forever etched his contribution to Middle-earth onto his skin, a permanent recognition of the secret second actor who breathed kinetic life into Gimli. The cinematic legacy of Gimli the Dwarf is a triumph of logistical ingenuity, agonizing physical endurance, and collective artistry. But the human narrative behind the beard belongs entirely to the remarkable evolution of John Rhys-Davies. The man who was strong-armed onto set by a managerial ultimatum, who arrived in New Zealand ready to tear the production apart, left the island nation as its loudest, most prophetic champion, proving that true cinematic magic can shatter even the most entrenched prejudices of a classical titan. So what's your favorite part of the John Rhys-Davies story? And who should I cover next in this series? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, Andy, Maha, and the rest of my incredible YouTube and Patreon supporters who help make these videos possible every month. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos like this one. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.